What happens all too often when I'm debating with atheists very informally in a place like Facebook is that I'll either ask them to provide some justification for one of their claims, or I'll make a very offhanded observation about atheist behavior or personality in general, like I'll call them a bunch of snot-nosed brats. But at that point, the atheist will throw down the gauntlet and demand of me, "Where is your evidence for God? Prove to me your God exists."
What point is there in debating you if you cannot show your side has any merit, you mentally deficient, butt-munching little chowder monkey? Hey, you seem to think calling people names is a viable debating tactic. Why can't I have some of the fun? Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. So, Skater Boy here seems to have a problem with atheists challenging his ideas. Why do you think that might be?
Because, in their mind, apparently, until you could demonstrate to their satisfaction that God exists, until you could solve that millennia-old debate of God's existence in a Facebook comment, everything the atheist says is to be regarded as true, and their behavior is to be regarded as being above reproach, and in their minds, that is how the burden of proof works.
Telling us how we think the burden of proof works? That's a paddling. I don't know which atheists you've been debating, but I don't know any who think the burden of proof works like that. Bottom line, you're saying a God is real, really exists. That gives you the burden of proof. When the atheist demands evidence of your God's existence, it's up to you to justify that assertion. That is how the burden of proof works. Like it or not, the atheist doesn't have a burden of proof. If you weren't claiming there is a God, nobody would even be discussing this at all. But you did. So now you have to show you're not completely full of crap. The atheist isn't even necessarily saying you're wrong. They're just asking you to show you're right. But you just admitted that you can't. How did you describe it?
Until you could solve that millennia-old debate of God's existence.
So why shouldn't someone think you're just talking out of your ass? You just admitted that God's existence is a problem. You're not speaking from a position of knowledge backed by factual data, and yet you expect to be taken seriously. Couple that with thinking it's reasonable debating tactics to call people names, and I don't see why anybody should grant you even the tiniest grain of credibility.
Now, obviously, I believe that there is a powerful affirmative case to be made for theism, and in particular Christian theism, but as my free time has narrowed and narrowed, I've learned, don't take the bait when someone asks you to provide evidence for God's existence in obviously bad faith. Don't take the bait.
So how could someone ask you to justify your position that God exists in what you'd call good faith? Is that even possible in your world? Because it sounds to me like what you're really saying here is, can't win, don't try, blame everybody else. If you cannot or will not defend your assertion that God exists, if every challenge to your position is made in bad faith, then, even if you don't realize it, what you're doing is taking your ball and going home because the other kids are better at the game than you are.
When someone asserts that there is no evidence for God and then asks you to prove them wrong, they're obviously asking in bad faith. If they were truly open to the possibility of evidence for God's existence, they wouldn't have already asserted that such evidence does not exist.
When most of the atheists I've ever spoken to say that there's no evidence for God's existence, what they mean is that there's no evidence for God's existence that has been presented. That doesn't mean they're not open to any. I'll admit, I don't like the idea of the Abrahamic God. A lot of what the dogma claims he's done makes him sound like a real asshole. But if you could present evidence, fact-based, empirical, scientific data which could be verified under controlled conditions, then my reaction would be, oh, I see. I wouldn't like it, but I'd be forced to admit that you have a legitimate case to be considered after all. But apparently, because you don't like how someone's position has been phrased, you're not even going to try showing your case has any merit. You're behaving like a child. Put on your big girl panties and start playing at the table where the adults are having real discussions instead of schoolyard shoving matches.
So, when someone says that to you, you say to them, prove to me that claim you just made. Prove to me that there is no evidence for God. I have no idea how you'd prove that claim, but hey, the burden of proof is on you. It's not my job to make your argument for you. End of discussion.
And this is a logical fallacy, a special plating argument called shifting the burden of proof. The job of proving an assertion is always on the person who says that something is the case, not the person challenging them on that assertion. You're saying God is real. You're failing to provide any hard data to support that assertion, and you're being challenged on it. Telling your challengers to prove you're wrong when you haven't even tried to prove you're right is cheating. If you try to claim that the invisible pink unicorn exists, and if nobody can prove you wrong, then it does, whether you've proved it or not, is simply ludicrous. But that's what you're doing here with God's existence. You're chickening out, running away, blaming everyone else for your failure, plugging your ears. Take your pick. Point is, if you're not prepared to have a real conversation where you actually defend your position, what possible reason is there to have anything more to do with you?
Hey, this is a nice computer you got over here. Be a shame you didn't subscribe to BionicDance. I'd hate for something bad to happen to it.